What's up, Level Gang? Today we're talking about Big Boss's interpretation of the boss's will. The boss had a profound effect on Metal Gear Solid, and her influence can be felt across the franchise despite being in only one game herself. At the end of MGS3, the boss talks about her globalist views and how she wants to see a world united regardless of borders. I'll have a link to my video breaking down the boss's will in the description below in case you've missed it or need a refresher on what the boss believed in. Okay, so fair warning. This video is gonna have spoilers for Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, and Metal Gear Solid 4, so you've been warned. Big Boss and Zero were the first people to try and interpret the boss's will after her death. Leading up to her death, both were tangled up in their loyalties to the US and to the mission as they both faced dire consequences if they were unable to successfully complete their mission. Not only would World War III kick off and the US's reputation lay in shambles, but the pair faced the firing squad should they fail. Success meant the boss's death though, and once she was dead, she left both Snake and Zero questioning their loyalties and their beliefs. There are three sides to Big Boss's beliefs: during the boss, after the boss, and regret. During the boss. During Big Boss's adolescence, the boss served as an example of loyalty to the end to her country. She sacrificed continually for the US, leading up to her relationship with Snake and while they worked together and fought together. Prior to taking BB on as her disciple, the boss had participated in a plethora of missions, including an infiltration mission in 1943 when she was pregnant. She almost lost her baby during this mission and instead lost herself to a coma as the bullet she dodged meant for her stomach grazed her brain instead. Despite this setback, the boss continued participating in missions for the US once she'd recovered 6 months later. During the D-Day landings at Normandy, she was charged with destroying several V-2 rocket installations. During this mission, she was shot in the gut this time. An emergency C-section saved her baby, though he was kidnapped by the philosophers and she never knowingly saw him again. Again, regardless, the boss pressed on and continued her espionage for the US. In 1951, she participated in atomic testing in the Nevada desert that rendered her infertile, but still, she carried on. It was this attitude to persist, regardless of sacrifice, that the boss modeled for Snake over the 10 years they spent together. When the boss and Snake met in the early 50s, she was drawn to their shared experience of both having been involved in nuclear testing, as Snake had been involved in the Bikini Atoll test of the first airborne detonation of a hydrogen bomb and had been rendered sterile as a result. In Hideo Kojima's The Creative Gene, he explains, "Spencer says you can only teach the things you can do yourself, and of the world you've seen yourself, and in your own way. But the game of catch that is teaching and learning will broaden your future. The pitches of confidence you throw to your children over a season will someday connect them to their destiny. To be autonomous is to walk forward with a purpose." In MGS3, the boss had a similar speech for Snake when she tells him that she can't teach him how to think, and instead teaches him how to be strong in spirit, body, and technique. She tells him the only thing you can learn from someone else is technique, and then Snake will need to figure out for himself how to think. The boss throws pitches to Snake repeatedly over their time together, and it's up to him to use what she teaches him. Big Boss's military career started when he was only 15, which is mind-boggling. He probably wasn't even done growing by that point, so his adolescence was spent in the military and in combat, fighting in the Korean War alongside the boss. During this time, the boss taught him combat, weaponry, survival, espionage, and foreign languages like Russian. Together, they also developed CQC. When the boss defects to the Soviet Union in the middle of the Virtuous mission, disrupting Snake's plans to successfully extract the Soviet rocket scientist Sokolov, he's devastated. Despite his personal feelings, Snake throws himself at the boss in an attempt to stop her from defecting and kidnapping Sokolov. He's loyal to the mission, even if that pits him against his mentor. In Operation Snake Eater, Snake is tasked with killing his turned traitor mentor, the boss, despite having been allies with her just weeks ago. Despite the agony it puts him in, Snake is again loyal to his mission, just like the boss taught him to be. Before the boss's death, Big Boss thought he understood the boss's beliefs and unabashedly hung his loyalty on the US, regardless of who was in charge. He remarks he follows the president and the top brass and is ready to die for them when questioned about his motivation for fighting, and follows up by saying he follows the will of the leader when it's pointed out that the president and the top brass won't always be in charge. Snake believes this is what it means to be loyal to the end, based on the concepts the boss pitches to him. She talks about the difference between a soldier and a fighter is a fighter has a belief they bring into battle, whereas a soldier is just a political tool for those in charge. Snake winds up in the role of a soldier, as by the end of MGS3 he's ordered to kill the boss in order to fulfill the needs of the times. He's used as a tool by those in charge, and his own personal beliefs have no bearing on this mission. This, along with the boss's speech at the end of MGS3, disillusions Snake to the president and the top brass of the US. He starts to understand how soldiers are viewed as an expendable commodity and how that affects soldiers on an individual level. Soldiers are pitted against friends thoughtlessly, and it only serves to divide the world further and push the world further away from the boss's vision, a world united. Snake shifts his nationalist beliefs from the US to a nation-state of his own soldiers. After the boss. Snake believes that any political powers that be could never value soldiers more than tools to push their political agenda forward. As a soldier himself, he could create a nation of soldiers where soldiers were valued as warriors and give them an opportunity to fight, not for the political agenda of political leaders, but for themselves. Big Boss was also disgusted by the boss's treatment by the powers that be. After all her sacrifice, they continued to ask more and more of her, eventually asking her to give her life and her well-earned reputation to save face for the US. For obvious reasons, this didn't sit well with Snake, and in his nation of soldiers, they would never be pitted against friends, so long as those friends Americans were also a part of Big Boss's nation. Big Boss wanted to see the world united, and this is how Big Boss sought to unite the world, under his flag. Snake claimed his nation had no ideals, though his ideals would be the appreciation of soldiers as warriors and more than tools of their government and a soldier's right to fight for themselves. I keep saying Big Boss's nation for a reason. A nation is the collective identity of a group of people understood as defined by shared features such as history, culture, and society. Soldiers that chose to join Big Boss shared his history as pawns used by their government and had become disillusioned by their original nationalities, so much so that they forgo them to join him. Regardless of what you call it, MSF, Outer Heaven, whatever, Big Boss commanded a company of people loyal to him in pushing his beliefs forward. They operated outside of any nation's cooperations and fought to supply themselves with what they needed while also building themselves up as a threat to deter any nation from trying to absorb them or threaten them into acting as an enforcer for them. Big Boss's story is a story of disillusionment with patriotism. His country, the USA, is being run by an inner circle with their own special interests guiding them. Everything is an illusion or dance meant to manipulate the people the way they need them to be manipulated. Big Boss wants to live outside the sphere of this inner circle where he and the soldiers that serve under him can't be used and tossed away. He also believes that if you can't enforce your beliefs with victory, your morals are meaningless. Big Boss sees himself as a gun, and instead of letting the hand of his government wield him, he chooses to point his artillery back at the US and any other government that threatens to take his and his soldiers' freedoms from them. Big Boss justifies the holding of nuclear weapons and even metal gears if it means having a deterrent against those who wish to attack and take from them what they've worked so hard to build. Only a soldier could understand a soldier's needs. Governments complicate things with their need to control more and more of the world. Big Boss didn't want to see another soldier used the way he and the boss were, though the more focused he became on the treatment of soldiers, the more he lost sight of what the boss truly wanted. It wasn't about soldiers, but about people coming together for the betterment of humanity. As Big Boss grew his nation of soldiers and carved out a place for himself in the world as a leader not to be messed with by the other world powers, the more he carved even more boundaries in the world. MSF versus the world. Outer Heaven, a haven for warriors. If you didn't fit in as part of Big Boss's tribe, you couldn't be included in his borders. Although the boss told Snake she couldn't tell him how to think, this certainly isn't what she would have wanted. Regret. By the time we get to the ends of MGS4, Big Boss has spent years trapped within his own mind in a coma. It gives him ample time to reflect on the impact he's had on the world and if his beliefs are still something he stands behind. Ultimately, Big Boss regrets what he's done. He realizes that he's misinterpreted what the boss had been trying to tell him at the start of all of this, admitting,
"It's about respecting the will of others and believing in your own. Isn't that what you fought for? At last, I understand the meaning behind what you did. At last, I understand the truth behind your courage."
Big Boss starts to understand that the boss didn't want to make a nation-state of soldiers employed to fight wars they were contracted to fight, but that people's own beliefs and wills should be respected, regardless of whether or not they're a soldier. The boss wanted to see a world where people respected one another and worked towards common goals regardless of background and borders, not people forced together or recruited under one flag. Big Boss spent a majority of his life in the military. As an adolescent through adulthood, he watched his mentors sacrifice for their country unwaveringly, and it soured him to political powers that be. He strived to accomplish what he felt his mentor wanted, which was to create a world where soldiers would never be used as tools and thrown away, and where soldiers wouldn't be pitted against their friends for the political gains of those in charge. He took a step towards a world like that in creating his companies, MSF, Outer Heaven, etc., and sought to grow them larger and larger. After pouring a lifetime into these goals, he's finally beaten down and spends years in a coma, where he slowly comes to realize his interpretation of the boss's will was a wrong one. He realizes she wanted people to respect one another and work towards a common goal for the betterment of humanity without borders. Big Boss understands his struggle and the struggle of others who tried to interpret her will as a struggle of liberty, but that the only liberty to be had was liberty of the self. At the end of Metal Gear 2, Big Boss says, "It doesn't matter who wins here. Our fight will continue. The loser will be liberated from the battlefield, and the winner will remain." Big Boss talks about soldiers fighting on the battlefield almost like they're trapped to do so until they're forced to stop fighting through their inevitable death. We go from Big Boss affronted that soldiers aren't valued more to a Big Boss that sees the soldier life as one being trapped within an endless cycle of war, with the only way to be liberated from it is through death. It's also interesting in MGR, Blade Wolf mentions freedom and what it means to win freedom for yourself, similarly to the liberty Big Boss mentions in regards to Solid Snake. Big Boss tells Solid Snake he was the only one with the freedom to live outside, meaning outside of norms and times and nations. Solid Snake fought hard for the freedom with Onacon, and it's interesting that the only two to achieve the kind of freedom Big Boss was after are the two that actually fulfilled the boss's will. We definitely have a video coming on these two and how they relate to the boss's will, but I also want to talk about Blade Wolf at some point and how his own beliefs intermingle with the main cast. Big Boss thought he understood the boss's will, but was blind to it as he focused instead on how exploited the two of them were during Operation Snake Eater. He never wanted to go through so much heartache again, nor did he want to see other soldiers used, and so he built up formidable walls to protect the people in his warrior nation. He even went so far as to acquire a nuke and a Metal Gear of his own. After it was all destroyed by his clone son, no less, he reflected on his interpretation of the boss's will and found it lacking. He finally understood that her dream had been for all people to experience liberty and a wholeness regardless of borders. He then died shortly after, which is so frustrating. He didn't even live long enough to do anything with his enlightenment. Thus is the story of Big Boss, I guess. And that's what we have for Big Boss's interpretation of the boss's will. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for making it to the end. Please like, subscribe, bell. More importantly, please take care of yourselves, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you.